What's up, STS Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Surviving the Survivor. 46 days since the quadruple homicides in Moscow, Idaho. Still no suspect, still no person of interest, still no murder weapon, but two more phenomenal guests. We bring you the best guests in the true crime genre. And if you have any questions about the investigation, the man you're looking at with a beard arguably knows more than anyone outside of law enforcement. His name is Kevin Fixler. He is the investigative reporter with the Idaho Statesman. He previously covered local government, environment, and transportation at the Press Democrat in Santa Rosa, California, and the Summit Daily News in Breckenridge, Colorado, from which he hails. I believe he's from Colorado originally, and holds degrees from the University of Denver and a pretty well-known school known as UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. I have a good friend who went there, and I know they are smart guys and gals. And the man who is clean-shaven and could once dunk a basketball, was once a college phenom, is Jonny Grusing. He spent 25 years as an FBI special agent where he investigated international terrorism, espionage, bank robberies, kidnappings, serial murders, special jurisdiction crimes, missing persons, public corruption, and other violent crime matters. He was also involved in multiple high-profile cases, which we'll talk about tonight, and studied behavior analysis. As I mentioned, he also starred as a college basketball player for Texas Tech. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We can be found anywhere podcasts are heard, not just on YouTube, but anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. If you want to get our newsletter, you drop your email into the comments section. Please support us on Patreon and my lovely mother. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And as my 8-year-old says, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm. And as I start every show, these often become whodunits. Let's take a moment to remember the 4 victims who were brutally murdered. Let us never forget those young lives lost way too soon. They are Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonsalves, 21, Zana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20. May their memories all be a blessing. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Kevin, obvious first question to the investigative reporter. Where does the investigation stand as of today? And it's probably a tough question to answer in just a couple of sentences.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd say things are a bit where they were even before Christmas. And I know that you've noted that things have slowed down as far as pace and also with the information that's getting out to the public and to the media. We're seeing fewer press releases come from police. There hasn't been a press conference since November 23rd, and we are in the 7th week of the investigation since the incident.
Now, we did get some information limited from police earlier in the week, and I have a quote here. Basically, it's not a quote, but investigators say they believe someone has information that could add context to what occurred on the night of the murders. That is according to police. And they ask you to submit tips, photos, and videos, quote unquote, whether you believe it is significant or not. Jonny, to you, what do you make of that when you hear that law enforcement is asking the public now to come forward and help with any sort of tips, whether they believe it is significant or not?
Well, I don't think they ever discourage the public from coming forward. I think this is something that's routine to say in an investigation like this when you can't really disclose what's going on. Just that they're willing to look at any tip that the public might have. It could mean a couple different things. There's so much to read into this case since not much is coming out, and I'm sure Kevin knows that from covering cases like this. But you're always going to have law enforcement want to see what else is out there, even if it confirms a path they're going down, or it could help them start something new.
And Kevin, you wrote a story, one of your most recent stories, and basically the headline reads something like, "It's personal to Idahoans." Can you elaborate on that? In what sense?
Sure. That actually was a quote from Senator Jim Risch, one of our two U.S. senators who had attended the university for law school and also for undergraduate. And I think he was sort of capturing the perspective from Idahoans, whether you attended the university, whether you're a member of the Greek life there, you're an employee or a member of administration, a student, a family who's related to somebody who attended the school. And it's just, it's an emotional situation here in Idaho. There's a lot of unanswered questions. There's questions about safety. There's questions about whether or not someone will ever be brought to justice for this heinous crime. And I think Idahoans are still just trying to understand how such a horrific thing could happen in such a small place and even in the state.
One other piece of kind of hard news to latch on to. What was interesting is just prior to the Christmas break, there were a couple of videos that surfaced. One of Maddie and Kaylee walking down the street, another of the body cam footage when they appear at the house. Police officers do, I believe it was on September 1st, and allegedly no one is home from the house. Then there's some confusion about maybe it was one of the roommates who survived. And by the way, speaking of that, Kevin, do we know in that body cam footage from September 1st, do we see one of the surviving roommates on that video? And was that person living there at that time? Do we know?
So I'm not familiar with who the young woman is who initially answers the door. And then there's two young men who also say they go to the school. They then come to the door and have a conversation with police. So it's not clear if anyone was home or if they were just sort of ducking responsibility.
And I just want to make it clear to everyone that Kevin is, currently working the story. He is a, dyed-in-the-wool reporter. I respect that. I come from that world. So there's not going to be any speculation on his part. It's just what his coverage of this story has been so far. With that said, Kevin, there was some news surveillance video that just leaked apparently on Reddit. And it's video allegedly of inside the corner bar where Kaylee and Maddie were the night before, and it appears that you see them. I'm curious, number one, how you approach video like this, and if it's verifiable, and your approach to seeing stuff like this leaked out from an investigative standpoint.
Well, somebody's got the inside track on information like that. The body cam footage is one thing. That's information that I think a number of media agencies have sought, and it's in process with the police department. Something like the Corner Club surveillance video, that's something that only the bar itself and, as far as I understand, police have access to. It could be an employee who leaked the information. It could be a member of law enforcement. Could be somebody else who happened to get their hands on it. We've tried to verify that information through the Moscow Police Department and through the investigators. And at this point, whether it's, they would verify body cam footage, obviously, but something like the street cam video that was leaked about a week and a half ago, and then also what appears to be authentic, I will say that, of the Corner Club, which I've been to. So I know that bar, and you can clearly see the same two individuals that appear to be Kaylee and Madison in that bar. So I've seen a still image of that. I sent that to investigators, and they're not willing to verify it. But as we all have two sets of eyes, and we can see that it does appear to be them.
And Jonny, I'm curious, and I've asked other guests who spent their careers in law enforcement, is it plausible that law enforcement would leak something like this for some reason or another, maybe to try to pull someone out, grab someone's attention, but does stuff like this get leaked by law enforcement intentionally?
I doubt it in this situation, Joel, only because you have multiple agencies that are coming together. Every decision that they make is going to be coordinated with heads of each department, FBI, Moscow PD, whoever else is helping. And so I believe every word that they speak in the media, especially with this national attention, is going to be scripted. It's going to be careful, and it should be by the book. So I don't see them leaking something out the side when you have something of this magnitude.
And Jonny, I'm curious, just for my own edification, how did you go from being a college basketball star to ending up, with a 25-year career in the FBI? How did you get interested?
Sure, happy to go there. Yeah, went to Texas Tech and did get to play there in my senior year. I had some extra credits, so I went ahead and got a master's degree in business. And while I was at a career fair, I met an FBI agent, and I figured that my life was going to be fairly routine to where I go and have a boring business insurance job by day, get to play some hoops at night. And this guy, his name's Greg, changed the trajectory of my life tremendously. He said, this isn't for everybody, and you won't make millions of dollars, which I didn't. But he said, every day is different, and you'll love what you do. And for me, I speak a lot to college kids and high school kids because I was able to be involved in some serial killer cases and work with the profiling unit. And what I tell the kids when I talk with them is, I'd love for you guys to have a job where 25 years feels like 5 or 6. And it truly did for me. So
Amen.
It was very difficult work. I did work with families like the 4 families here. And it took a big toll, but it was also very, very gratifying when we find out who does something like this. And the road ahead for Moscow PD and the FBI is likely going to be very difficult to identify this person, but it looks like I just see stuff on social media. I don't have an end to this case at all, but I did work a lot of these, and it is going to be very time and labor intensive. It already has been. My guess is nobody's gone home to their families. They're working 7-day weeks, 16-hour days, and they've divided up into teams, and they have their command post with their maps up and their assignments, and it's a grind, and it will continue to be a grind for them for the next however long.
And you live, eat, and breathe this, and I'm sure Kevin is doing that to an extent. Kevin, since you mentioned you were at the corner bar, tell us what's it like, and also, I don't believe you're living in Moscow, but how often are you on the ground there, and what's the feeling like there right now?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm based in Boise, and Moscow is about probably about 5.5 hours north, and it's right on the Washington state line, across from Pullman, where Washington State University is. I was up there early December, and I'll be heading back there in mid-January as well as students return. And that'll be close to the 2-month anniversary, unfortunately, from when this incident occurred. But the Corner Club, yeah, it's sort of, and I've heard you've had other guests on, and they've described it as well. It's kind of it's a dive bar, and it's got sports theme. It's got the neon lights on the wall. A lot of University of Idaho regalia, from black and white basketball photos to signed jerseys, football team. There's been a number of stars who have come through there and gone to the NFL. It's a small place, and it's the type of place you'd go to see a game, or maybe after a game, you go have several drinks with your friends. They've got ladies' night. They've got discount drinks, happy hours, and free popcorn. It's that kind of bar with just a handful of tables. And if you go in, you probably know your bartender, and you probably know a lot of the people who are there. As far as Moscow itself, it's kind of cliche to say that people are on edge, but they really are. And it's because this is a community that just isn't familiar with a crime of this magnitude. Police there are used to, minors in possession of alcohol and, bike thefts and things like that. We've heard from the mayor there. That's the type of thing that they're used to catching people for or writing tickets over. But a crime like this is just, it really is unfathomable for that community, and also for Pullman, which those two cities are really kind of sisters, and a lot of people spend time in both. It's just, it really has caught everybody off guard.
Can you take us back to the night or the day you got the news that this quadruple homicide happened? And, when did you realize this was going to be perhaps one of the biggest crime stories, of certainly this century? And in the last bunch of years for sure.
Yeah, I was actually out of town when we first got the word on this, and I was heading back. It's kind of an interesting story. A colleague of mine who covers mornings, breaking news, she was to be out of town. So a month prior, I had actually volunteered to take over the assignment to work 3 mornings, which is not typically what I would do. But on my way back to town, my editor had reached out and said, "Hey, we've got a pretty big situation. I'm going to need you to jump on this in the morning." So I kind of picked up the pieces where a different coworker had begun work on that Sunday. And if anyone knows a newsroom, typically weekends are pretty low staffed, and so you're just hoping either something terrible doesn't happen or you've got a good person on the ground. And in this case, we did. So I kind of picked up the pieces on Monday morning. Early that day, we start making phone calls and try to learn anything we can. And at that time, police would not even say what had occurred, just that there had been 4 students who had died. We started to see the word homicide thrown around, but wouldn't say whether it was violent in nature, really would not give us anything. But just through diligence and continuing to try to ask the right questions, we started to piece things together before they did finally say that this was an incident with an edged weapon. And then they eventually said it was a knife.
And I've got to give Jonny a lot of credit. He's one of the few guests that sent me a ton of information. I'm going to try to get through it because it's interesting. And a lot of this I haven't heard of. I'm sure you guys haven't heard of. Maybe Kevin has. But so, Jonny, starting to go through some of your talking points that you sent ahead of time, what is the difference here between interpersonal and affective violence? And then I want to move on to motive.
So we have predatory violence, in which if you look out in the nature, it's like a leopard that is hiding and waiting to attack and separate the gazelle, and they go through a pre-attack phase where they're being super quiet. They go through the attack phase, and then the post-offense behavior of predatory violence. It's much more methodical. It takes longer to plan. The affective or emotional violence, you don't have a long planning cycle. There are warnings ahead of time. There's a pre-existing relationship between the offender and the victim. And that is when you can truly have someone snap, because they've given a lot of warning signs to the victim prior to the violence.
You're a seasoned investigator, and so obviously you're coming in from a much different angle than Kevin. I assume you have given some thought to possible motives. You talk about organized and disorganized crimes and also possible profiles. So with all that said, do you have a thought about a possible motive? Was this an organized or disorganized crime, and what's the difference?
Well, I threw those out there, Joel. It's stuff for you to chew on. This is a unique situation to me because I'm used to being a case agent and having all the information and looking from the inside out at all the possibilities. And I learned from a lot of very seasoned investigators in front of me that you let the facts drive your theories, not your theories drive the facts. And I think if we can speculate on motive. I've looked at it, quite a few news articles, listened to a couple of podcasts that I had to turn off on after 2 minutes because and Kevin knows this, after working crime, there's a lot of speculation we can do. And if you look at it like a pie chart, it can be 50% that there was a pre-existing relationship between one of the 4 of these, or one of the 2 that were in the basement. Maybe they weren't, maybe they were the targets and the suspect didn't know. I mean, we could spin theories here, but I don't think that's helpful. I think what's helpful is that once law enforcement goes through this gauntlet of information, which is going to be search warrants on all their cell phones, search warrants on all the devices, all the phones that hit off that cell tower, which is going to be a tremendous amount of work to sort that out, prior tenants, a neighborhood, and I'm sure that's been done. Kevin, you'll know better than me, but in my time, 25 years, I've seen good neighborhoods and very bad ones. And we as the FBI had to go back through and do a very thorough neighborhood to make sure no one was left uncontacted within like a half-mile radius of that residence, to where we knew who was in the house. And Then you start it if there's DNA collection, and I think they've got to collect DNA. Whether they even have it now or not, they eventually will. And we learned that the hard way in one of the cases you'll go through on these. But yeah, the thing that the profiling unit gave me was they saw these cases. Like we had our BAU 4 was Behavior Analysis Unit 4 was crimes against adults. And all they would do, guys, was consult 5 to 10 consults a day on horrific crimes against adults. So once you're there for 15, 20 years, you've heard it all, and therefore you can compare what might have happened here to other similar crimes. And that shouldn't drive how you do the investigation, but it will give you some theories to work with. And that's why I sent you those. I'm not saying that the cases that I sent you is what happened here, but I'm saying that's a similar type of violence. And we didn't know until the case was solved the motive. And often, Joel, I've been in front of serial killers, serial rapists. They can't articulate the motive even after it's done because they don't even know. Some of these, I worked a lot of mass attacks as well. You would finally, the survivor, unfortunately, is the attacker. You get them and they question, and they go, I don't know why I did it. I just did it. So
it's so interesting. I just had a conversation. Someone reached out to me, and for a living, they are a psychologist. They help people with severe OCD. We were talking about the fine line between compulsion to kill and actually killing, and I'm working to get her on the show. It's a fascinating look inside. To your point that these people didn't even know why they were killing. But I want to get to some of these cases and one that Kevin knows about. But I'm curious, Jonny, when I interview guys like you, I always find a common thread, which is investigators are very measured, very cool-headed, kind of like you have to be on a basketball court to lead a team. In your opinion, what makes a great investigator?
Patience and persistence. If you have those two things, I mean, there's not a statute of limitations for homicide. And I've worked on cases that have been solved in one day. Some have taken 20 years. But I'm hoping this one doesn't. But if it does, I hope that they continue until it is solved. I'm not saying this thing will take 20 years, but I've been on cases that we've looked at it and done basically a case audit and come back through, found the guy that slipped through the cracks, and we're able to get them. But it is the final thing that I saw. One of my errors I made early on. I am a hard worker. The only way I played basketball was by shooting 300 3-pointers a day, and then it became making 300 3-pointers a day. I'm a gym rat. I'm not a superb athlete. But I found one thing I could do well, and it's shoot the ball. So, do one thing well, and you're ahead of most people. But it's the same thing. I took that work ethic to the FBI, and especially once you start meeting the families of like Madison and Kaylee, and it becomes human and personal to you, there's no amount of things you won't do for them. But I'm hoping that this team there has a very good system, and I've seen good ones and bad ones. The best one that I worked with was in Westminster when Jessica Ridgway disappeared. And we had probably a team of 80 investigators that worked 16-hour days for 30 days straight. And we all had very organized tasks. We came back and we debriefed every day. The press releases were very scripted. We had behavior analysis unit in the corner. I mean, it was fantastic. And community brought us food. We had big maps up on the wall. That's the one that I was talking about, how no door was not addressed. And if they didn't answer the door, we were there over and over again. It was the most thorough investigation we have. And even then, we almost missed our predator.
Interesting. And is that the case that you believe is potentially most closely tied to this one, or no?
No, I gave you 4 or 5. The reason that I'm giving you that one is that I'd like for the community to know what is going on behind the closed doors. And it is just a lot of work, and it is focused work, and it's a team environment, and it's like we were divided into neighborhoods, physical evidence team, like the knife that Kevin mentioned. There's going to be a team of people that all they're doing is looking for knives that were purchased, knives that were reported, etc. You'll have so many search warrants going, multiple warrants on every phone, every app that's inside the phone, the cars, the house. There's just so much data coming in that's why you're not going to see a lot of them just briefing you every day on, okay, here's the latest thing. They're getting just inundated with the results of all their investigation right now.
And to that point, Kevin, has it been at all frustrating dealing with the Moscow Police Department? And the question is not meant in any way to bash them, but as Jonny just alluded to, in the Jessica Ridgway case, it sounds like they really had, talking points, very polished, knew that they had to brief the press. This is a small town. There's no denying that. From your perspective, has it been frustrating to deal with law enforcement to try to get any information?
It's always a balance, right? We want to help solve this crime too, and we want to inform readers and put their minds at ease that this is a capable group. But you have the FBI and Idaho State Police, and we want to keep people informed about that, share the stories about who these individuals were, who were lost. And yet, early in, I think people noticed that this was not a department that was really prepared to do this. One of the first questions I had when I was in touch with the contact for this case was, where's the press conference? There was no information about if one was coming or if it would be scheduled or what would happen. And then when they did finally schedule one, I believe it was 3 or 4 days later, the police chief came out and acknowledged that this was something he probably should have done days before. That's not necessarily the message you're looking for out of your leader. A mea culpa is okay to move on, and I think they were able to make that transition. But I'll tell you that there were a number of members of media who weren't even able to attend that first press conference because it was planned in an area of the new police department that could not house the capacity based on the level of interest. So there were a lot of missteps like that. We know, of course, sort of walking back whether or not this was a targeted incident. You had other public officials elected who have said various things. It doesn't seem like they're on the same page at sometimes. I do think they've sort of brought that all together and are on brand and sort of do have a better direction now, consistency of message, and also pace with how they're handling the media and the information they're willing to distribute to the public, including asking for information, things like tips or any information they might have about the individual, as well as the Hyundai Elantra that they continue to search for. So it has been a bit frustrating at times, but at the same time, we understand they have a job to do, and they also recognize we do too. We're going to continue to ask questions and hold them accountable, which is also what the families want of us.
And how many days into the murder, which happened November 13th, did you notice national and even global media descending on Moscow? How many days did it take for the national media to arrive? And are they still there at this point, or have most of the big outlets taken off?
They were there pretty quickly. As I said, once a press conference was finally held, they did not have the space for the local outlets, including ours, the Idaho Statesman. A colleague of mine, Angela Palermo, was first up there. She actually attended the university and had also worked for the local Pullman newspaper before joining us. And she said it was, the area was basically crawling with TV cameras and news outlets. So you've got, the agencies out of Spokane, which is pretty close. The New York Times was up there very quickly, Fox News. We've seen any other number, whether it was News Nation or Court TV or the local TV networks, they're all up there. Now today, I think after the holiday, we've seen either a transition of some people in and some people out. And I think given that the university is currently out for Christmas break or winter break, I guess it is, I believe there's fewer out there, but I would imagine some will be coming back. But we have seen a little bit, especially with the pace of the investigation as it has slowed, we are seeing less national news coverage.
And I know they announced that there's going to be new security measures. They're going to be offering self-defense classes once students, if they do return. Do you think that has assuaged the nerves at all, or was that kind of just lip service to calm the community in essence?
I think it's something that the university has had to do to put minds at ease and make sure that students know that they're doing everything they can. There isn't really a lot of fault to be had here by the university. This is something that happened to that school, and they're doing the best they can, whether it was holding the vigil or assisting with the memorial that was held ultimately, and now trying to put their best foot forward with giving space for tributes and memorialization, but also trying to turn the page to some extent and provide for what people need in order to return. And that's apparently what a lot of the students and faculty have said to the university, that they do actually want to return. There was a lot of talk about a lot of remote learning and things like that. And while they are providing some of that, I don't believe they're going to the extent that they originally thought they might have to, as if it was kind of back in pandemic times, high COVID, and providing for that remote learning. There is some of that they've opened up, but it's not to the extent that I think they originally thought they might have to for the second semester.
Interesting. There is a infamous killer named the Missoula Mauler that Johnny sent me some information on. His real name was Wayne Nance. He shot and stabbed his victims, often raping them beforehand. This went on between 1974 and 1986. Well, there was a young man who studied this guy, and his name was Scott Lee Kimball. And Johnny, if you could tell us, he became a serial killer in his own right, and you worked with him. I'm just curious, if there's relevance in your mind between him and anything related to this case, and why you brought it to our attention.
Yeah, I learned the most, Joel, I learned a lot from the behavior analysis unit, but I did spend 15 years inside the mind, unfortunately, of Scott Kimball, who was an informant of ours, who was also a serial killer. And once we took off his serial killer mask and we started recovering his victims, we had multiple victims in Utah, some in Colorado. We think they're actually across the Western United States. One time he drew a bunch of tombstones, knowing that I would see it because I saw his mail, and Wayne Nance was very prominent. And I didn't even know, he had never talked to me about Nance, but he grew up in Hamilton, Montana. Scott did, while Nance was going around killing people as a home invasion type killer. I just say that to say, unfortunately, with social media, we don't know what energized this person to do this thing. I didn't even know a guy that I spent 10 years with in the deserts and recovering victims and whatever until he told it. He didn't disclose to me that Wayne Nance was what got him started. And I do work with school districts now, and I know that our people who are thinking of attacking study prior crimes. So I think once they find this victim, since I do believe it was predatory violence, it could be a mix of somewhat effective, but since we don't have many clues, nobody saw this guy walking randomly down the street trying to stab people, and then he wound up in this house. And as an aside, Joel, sorry, I've had a sheriff before come forward and say exactly what the chief did here, in that this is targeted violence, and we don't believe there's a threat to the community. And those things seem contradictory, right? But this attacker took a lot of energy and focus in this residence, and it seemed that we're guessing it, that he, just based on percentages, was primarily focused on the residence. What I found in working serial killers, serial rapists, is that they live, unfortunately, all around us. In working the Jessica Ridgway case, I found that I had a kid two houses down from my house that had been on trial for capital murder and almost got the death penalty. And he would walk by my FBI car, every morning smoking. So when I believe the sheriff in my case and the chief in this one is saying the public doesn't need to be, you shouldn't really treat this. This is going to shake your community, absolutely. But this targeted violence means this predator had his focus on this house and who was inside of it. You should live, yeah.
And I just want to clarify that, because we've had people, there's been a debate on our show. Did the killer target the home or target the people? But when you say targeted residence, I think you're implying they're targeting the people in that residence, not the home per se. Is that right?
I've had both. We had a serial rapist who targeted homes because he knew that he could control certain homes better than apartments. And I'm not saying that's the situation here, Joel, but I'm saying that all of the violence of that night was inside of the residence. That's what I'm trying to say.
And so you don't think this is a serial killer, correct?
I think I have limited perspective, but I think it's unlikely, because the killers that I've seen have separated their victims from families, from friends, and made sure they would be successful in getting away. So I think the odds are against this being a serial killer.
Jonny, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely. I'm glad you are.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, given your expertise, how often would we maybe see a serial killer who would kill multiple people like this in one fell swoop?
It's happened. Again, my role, I was the appendage of the profiling unit. I was not a profiler, but I was the boots on the ground for them in Colorado and Wyoming. So I get a lot of training from them and come back and get to investigate cases with their training. I did get to hear of some cases. The other one that I sent you, Joel, that I thought was interesting was the Omaha case of Anthony Garcia. So the profilers actually came to Colorado to present this case because in 2008, inside of an Omaha house, we had a 11-year-old kid who was stabbed with knives left inside of him, and the housekeeper stabbed brutally. And we had a case in Aurora in 2010 that looked pretty similar. The butcher block was emptied out into one of our victims. And so with Aurora and with Omaha and with the profilers, we were trying to brainstorm, is this the work of the same guy? And we couldn't say yay or nay. And then it's not till 2013, another doctor. So it was a doctor. The kid's dad and mom were doctors. And so another doctor was brutally murdered with his wife, stabbed to death inside their house. And that's when the police were able to say, oh, and they figured out that this was a former student of theirs, basically, that both these had failed out. And he had a deep-seated grievance against them. But who would have thought another doctor was going around killing doctors, right? So when I say, when you ask Kevin about multiple victims in a house, this killer, and he was a doctor supposed to be doing good for society, right? Dr. Anthony Garcia, he's killing an 11-year-old and the house cleaner when his targeted victims are mom and dad.
And that 11-year-old boy was Thomas Hunter, and the house cleaner was Shirley Sherman, a horrible tragedy. I'm curious because not a lot of people get to develop a relationship with a serial killer. You did, Jonny. What was that like with Scott Lee Kimball? I mean, what's it like? And by the way, did he know, because you said some people didn't even know why they were committing these murders. Did he tell you why he killed or enjoyed killing, which I presume he did?
It took him a long time, Joel. I spent, unfortunately, 10 years with him before he told me that's closest to he could of why. He would blame it on his mom or a guy that he said raped him when he was little, which I don't know if that was true or not. But most of what Scott did was self-preservation and game playing. He was a master and remains a master manipulator. He tricked the FBI in 3 different divisions to think he was this knight in shining armor when he was going around killing people. So off the charts intelligent, but out of dealing with violent crime for 23 of my years, I ran into a few evil people. He is truly evil because he enjoyed killing. And he told me one time when we were taking him back to jail after debriefing with his attorneys that I should name him the opportunity killer because he just killed whenever there was an opportunity to do so. So I don't see that very often. I didn't.
I'm curious, Johnny, if you have kids, if you have a family, and how that affects hearing someone like Kimball, how it affects your 360 view of the world, and if you're extra careful when it comes to your family.
It did. That's those and a couple other cases are ones I couldn't help but taking home. And much like the investigators that are working this murder, these four murders they're taking it home. And unfortunately, their families and even their kids are living through this thing. Mine was unusually long, primarily because we couldn't find one of Scott's victims, Jennifer Markham. The FBI did not treat her parents well early on because her parents had good information. And the FBI was thinking, that we got this. And the dad was knocking on the door, and the FBI was ignoring him. And I became good friends with them. But part of my long pursuit and relationship with Kimball was to find out what he did to Jennifer in all sorts of different ways. I wasn't successful, but we did find out a lot of different things. But yes, it took a toll on my family. My wife was my sounding board. My daughter, in her senior year of high school, had a dream that she was in our house here, this house, and the four victims, there were Leanne, Casey, Jennifer, and Uncle Terry, were trying to hide because Scott was in the house trying to find them. She tried to get behind them in the couch with room, and they said, "There's no room here." And so my daughter Bethany couldn't hide there. And so she ran into her bathroom to hide in her shower. I was in her shower in the dream. And I said, "Bethany, this is my hiding place." And I pulled the shower door closed.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, you bring these things home, and there is collateral. My daughter's now actually a police officer in Golden, Colorado, and loves it.
Good,
But she saw a section of the world that most people don't see at 14, 15 years old. Absolutely.
Wow. So there have been a couple other cases, Kevin, that has garnered the attention of people who are interested in the Moscow case, and that is the August 13, 2021 stabbing in Salem, Oregon, and then May 25th, going back to 1999, a knife attack in Pullman, Washington. I get a lot of comments from viewers asking, have these two cases definitively been ruled out as possibly being related to the Moscow case? And I think you might have the answer.
Police came out pretty early and said they did not believe there was any connection. And in fact, in the 1999 case in Pullman, one of the women who was stabbed, I believe both survived. They were both students at Washington State University, but it was her ex-husband who ultimately pled guilty to first and second degree assault. I believe he served 6 years. And then the case in 2021, that remains unsolved. That was where there was a couple who was attacked. The man died, whereas the woman survived 19 stab wounds. But again, thus far, police do not believe that there is any connection to the incident in Moscow.
And what about this? We keep hearing about this dog that was skinned. Number one, has that been corroborated? Because some people said, well, maybe a coyote got to it. Do we know if the dog was actually skinned, and if Moscow police have ruled that skinning out as being related to the case?
Yeah, police have addressed that incident. I don't have a reason to believe that it wasn't what the owners allege. And police simply said that they're aware of the situation. And again, they don't believe that there's a connection.
Johnny, a guy like Scott Kimball, did he start off killing animals? A lot of serial killers do.
He did, but he was a hunter and a guide. So he was a big time hunter. I believe he started killing at age 17, and we didn't arrest him until he was 36. So he had 20 years out there.
Did he ever tell you, did he ever say if he was nervous in that time period? Did he know that you guys were going to hunt him down?
He got so good at it, unfortunately, Joel, that's why he became an FBI informant, was to challenge himself. So with 3 different offices, he was bringing the FBI as close as he could to some of his killings without telling on himself.
Wow, that is so wild. Back to some other news related to the case, Kevin. I know some of the other outlets actually spoke to the rideshare driver that dropped off the young women. Anything come of that? Did we learn anything from that?
Not a ton. It sort of put to rest, I guess, who the individual was. We heard from police that a quote unquote private party had delivered two of the women home from the food truck. We heard early in from the Gonsalves family that it was an Uber driver. So, yes, as you said, a couple of other news outlets tracked him down. He said that he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. He didn't recall being followed. He said that he was familiar with the three women who lived in the house who died just from prior ride shares, other trips from before. And I know that he said that this has really weighed on him, the fact that he was one of the last people to see them alive. So I know, again, according to the reporting, that that was something he's really thought a lot about, but police cleared him very early in.
And Johnny, to you, what do you think law enforcement should be doing at this point in the investigation? If you were, let's say, leading this investigation, where would your head be right now?
Victimology, which is what about these victims drew this offender there, the more solid, and they're doing that, so, but the more solidly, who their last text was, working back to 2 weeks ago, all their different, again, when you go into a phone, it's compartments, it's Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, all those things are like new warrants. And so to really understand these 4 victims, but even then the tenant who wasn't there, and then the other 2 in the basement, you got to understand through them, if you don't have other leads, what drew the offender there. And then you're going to look at what offenders are in your territory. And that's why you do the neighborhood. To see ring doorbells is part of it, but you've got to do an extremely thorough neighborhood. The cell phone stuff is critical as well. They'll be looking at that, and I'm sure they're doing all this, but this creates a mountain of work to do. So, and it's not letting the unlikely suspect slip through your net. When the Jessica Ridgway case that I told you about earlier, because of the level of violence and the expertise the offender did to Jessica Ridgway, a 10-year-old girl, the expert said our offender had to be 30 years old. We cast a net of any males 18 to 40. And the first time through the neighborhood, we missed 17-year-old Austin Sigg, thinking there's no way a 17-year-old was capable of this type of violence, planning, expertise. So I've seen stuff out there on the internet. This can't be a female, can't be this. And you can't go there. All you have to do is do your investigation and do it as thoroughly as possible. See where it takes you. And as a friend of mine said, you go down the cul-de-sac completely. So if you get a lead, you finish the lead. You don't go halfway down and figure, there's probably nothing there, because guess what? Someone's going to have to rework it 6 months, a year from now.
I can tell you that police have done 250 interviews. That was information I got yesterday. But I also will share, having been in that neighborhood and canvassed it a few times myself while up there in December, a lot of the neighbors told me they had initial conversations with police, and I'm not questioning their procedure or process at this point, but a lot of them either remember details after the fact or what have you, and said that they did not hear back from police. They didn't get repeat knocks once they had those initial conversations. So I do know that's the status there. I can't say who they've spoken to or who they haven't. I just know that of the people I spoke to, they either had an initial conversation and nothing more, or not a whole lot after that.
And Johnny, that's interesting. Should law enforcement be circling back 2-3 times? I know it takes an awful lot of manpower and time, but people do remember things later on. Do they need to go back and knock on those doors?
That's a hard lesson. I didn't learn it till later. It's not the one and done, because like you said, Kevin, people get stuff later. What we tried to do is to turn each neighbor into a source of ours, an information source, and you just open that door and say, anything you remember, you can help us solve this case, call us. I will pick up the phone. And that's how we solved Ridgeway. It was we went through 30 days of 16 hours, and we had nothing. And finally, a neighborhood watch woman, she knew the business of everybody else in the neighborhood. And by the way, Joel, we love those people that know the business of everybody else.
Every neighborhood has at least one.
Yep, and that's who they need to make friends with if they haven't already. And she said, I don't know if this means anything, but that Austin Sig kid, he creeps me out. And his mom came over after you guys knocked on her door, and she acted weird to me. And so I don't know if it means anything. And to some people, they might say, thank you, lady, for your time. We've already talked to you. But yeah, it's the tiny stuff and the opening those doors of communication. But they've got to have the resources to handle that information load when it comes in.
Wow. And that was just in passing. You're walking by and she says, hey, this guy creeps me out. You might want to take a look. And boom, that helps solve your case.
Yeah, we had knocked on her door once, like you were saying, Kevin. We did the initial where we walked through. This was about 10 blocks away from Jessica. So this woman, though, had kept the business card of an FBI agent named Chris, and he said, call me anytime. He knew she was the neighborhood watch. And so it was 3 weeks later, and we were out of leads. We were about to start going through the 10,000 tips and starting over from square one when she made that call.
Yeah. Speaking of tips and leads, Kevin, the white Hyundai Elantra 2011 to 2013, that's still in play. They still want information on that vehicle?
Yeah, even to the extent that if you own one or your neighbor owns one or you've seen one out on the road or you've seen a for sale sign, whatever it is, it's to call it in and just let them know that it's in existence, and that way they can check it off the list.
Jonny, you gave me a question. I'm going to turn around on you. How likely is it, and then we'll get to some viewer questions and comments if you guys will indulge. But the question is, how likely is it that there's a connection that existed between one or more of the victims and the offender, as well as modern technology and forensic methods that could help solve this all?
So yeah, I'm sure it's out there. I don't want to divulge something that would jeopardize things, but this is out there. Touch DNA has been the last 10 years. And that's going to be really tricky with that house, with having so many people in and out. But you've got to swab everything, and I'm sure they have. But you're going to have so many DNA profiles that's why Jessica turned out to be a DNA case. And it is an excellent way to interview someone to say, would you like to help us see what happened to Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan? Absolutely. Then can we take your DNA to eliminate you since you've been in the house or since you're a neighbor? And that changes your interview as well, because people, you start tightening up a little bit if you have something to hide. But I think DNA, technology, and yeah, there's something that drew the offender there. You know, I sent you another article that we had a homicide in Denver a year ago where a whole family was killed over a cell phone. You know, a teenager thought that one of the kids took his cell phone. It was the wrong family, and they burned them alive. So we can speculate all day on why, but that's why I just say, as an investigator, do the investigation, see where it leads you. And I'm sure they're doing that. I'm just hoping that they have the resources they need to do it.
Let's see how many questions / comments we can get through. I'm not sure how many of these Kevin will be able to address. Kevin, feel no ego here, so feel free to jump in as a reporter too. But this one comes from user with a gazillion letters. One thing that we haven't heard about is the students' comments and interactions on their social media. I have a hunch, or say it could be someone that reached out to the students, had their ego bruised, and if a psychopath, that may have been all it took, and they go on. But Kevin, to you first, actually. Do we know, have we asked police if they are checking, and I assume they have to be checking the social media landscape of these 4 students, but do we have that confirmed?
I guess what I would say is my understanding is they have some specialists, either with Idaho State Police or with the FBI, who are doing that type of digital forensic review.
And Johnny, you just a short time ago said these are basically modern day search warrants. It gives you access into a whole world. Phones are compartmentalized. How important is their social media footprint?
Very important. That's the victimology piece we were talking about. So yeah, it's going to be a goldmine of information.
Next comment comes from Chico's mummy. I was thinking about all the cars parked at the house that night and trying to work out who they all belonged to. I know Ethan had his vehicle parked there. To me, this means the killer knew who was in the house, or at least had to factor that in, surely. Kevin, it was a while before they removed those cars, but do we know how many cars were there? 4 cars there? There were more than that, I believe.
Trying to recall now, and we've all seen those same images. I believe there were 5. I do know which vehicle was which, or at least we've made some assumptions about them just based on the license plates. So, yeah, we basically know whose vehicle was which.
And again, Johnny, you're an investigator. You're looking at all that, right? I mean, you're looking at those vehicles, and once they were removed, there were these haunting images of just these empty, spaces in the snow. But as an investigator, you're looking at every possible angle, right?
Very high risk behavior to walk into a house with multiple vehicles out front by yourself with only a knife instead of a weapon, a gun, something like that.
So what does that tell you in your mind? And by the way, let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer this, but when you go to the local supermarket later tonight or tomorrow morning, are you thinking about this? Like, are you thinking about this case and wondering, hey, I hope investigators did this. I hope investigators did that. I wonder if it could be X, Y, Z. Is a case like this rolling around in your head still, since it's such a part of who you've become?
Yeah, these cases like this, again, it's weird for me to sit on the outside instead of the inside. But absolutely, since you asked me if I'd joined the show, I've been eating and drinking this for the last 24 hours or so. So what it tells us about the offender, it's hard to say, though. Is it just go in and basically to hell with it? I don't care about myself or my life. Or did the offender know that they're going to be asleep and out? We can only guess and stuff like that. Well, all I know is that is very high risk behavior to walk in when you have at least 6 people in the house.
Next comment comes from Miss American Thinker. I like the name. Since 2 of the victims had a relative recently arrested with regards to drugs, the toxicology report is very relevant. We were talking about that on the other show. Also, the longer this takes to solve, the more likely it is the possibility of this being a hit due to the nature of charges 2 of the victims' relatives were popped for. Before I go any further, and it's a long comment, Kevin, factually speaking, as a investigative news reporter, has any of this been confirmed or corroborated that I think it was Madison Mogen's mother had a drug arrest or any other arrests that we know of related to drug charges?
We should probably correct that. I believe it was Xana Kernodle's mother was.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, as far as I understand, she was actually in jail at the time of the incidents with what's been a string of drug charges in her history. I'm not sure who the other person they're maybe speaking to. I know maybe there was some legal issues in the past for the uncle of Kaylee Gonsalves, but I'm speaking a little bit out of turn on that. So some of that has been confirmed, but yeah, did you have another question about that?
Well, that was my mistake. It was not Madison Mogen, it was Xana Kernodle. But I'm wondering, Johnny, again, you're looking at everything. Someone is in jail on a drug charge. Drug dealers like to get paid. Are you looking at that angle too? You're looking at everything, I assume. How seriously do you take that?
Of course, you have to take it seriously. But Joel, when something like this happens, it's like a still shot of our lives. And we all have things that if our cell phone is made public to the world, how would you look? And I have an immediate family member who spent plenty of time in jail as well. So, that doesn't mean anything towards me. You're just going to have that when we get into the messiness of people's lives when something like this happens.
And that is an excellent point. And most lives are pretty messy when you pull back that Instagram curtain. Next comment comes from S. Masson. Given that there's always been easy access online as to what the house looks like on the inside from rental companies, etc., I don't understand why people are so focused on the killer having been in the house before and the killer being local. Kevin, it is true that this house appeared in some like online Zillow type websites, right? So people could have seen the layout of the home without actually ever having been inside of it. Is that right?
Yeah, and of course, with cyber sleuthing and so forth, we've seen a lot more as far as a 3D model and images that have come out since that time. My colleague Sally Krusig and I did a story about the house. Clearly, this has been something of national attention at this point. I mean, so many of us know what it looks like. You could ask your neighbor; everybody has seen it, and the unique nature of the addition that was added, which kind of created that basement first floor. And then you have kind of that sliding glass door as an entry point on what would have been kind of the first floor, but is the second in its current form. But, even local police, they thought it was a strange home. There's a different body cam footage that came out, and it was from the August noise complaint. And this is all out there online for people who want to look it up. But even one of the police officers in having a conversation with Kaylee in that case, as they were knocking on that back door, waiting for somebody to come out, they noted that there's no staircase that leads to the upstairs balcony. That's the third floor, and what's believed was Kaylee's room, just based on Instagram videos and things like that. But they noted that the cop in the video says, "Oh, there's no staircase to that upper floor, to the balcony." Interesting was how he put it. So, if you talk to police, they think this was targeted, and as a result, and as Jonny said, this is high risk behavior. So to do something like this probably would require you to know something about the home. But again, I mean, it's a bit of speculation, but it is certainly a unique layout to that home. You'd really have to do your research to have an idea what lies beyond that door if you weren't inside yourself beforehand.
And Kevin, I'm curious, did you push police at all on that term? We hear the word targeted so much, it becomes like innocuous and nebulous, like you don't really even know what it means. But when they said that, were they inferring from your reporting that they were targeting a specific person in that house, like it was some sort of retribution?
Well, what's so interesting about this case is sort of the absence of information, right? And that's how a lot of speculation has brewed. But as far as whether or not it was an individual or the home itself, we really know a lot of that from the Gonsalves family, with Steve, the father, talking about how based on the types of wounds, whether or not it was his daughter or Madison Mogan, the two grew up together, that based around that. And the question about why would somebody enter the home and then need to go up to that third floor where there's only one staircase to get up there. So that's really information that comes from the family. Police and the county prosecutor, they kind of went back and forth on whether or not this was targeted as the home or the individual, and if it was targeted at all. I think ultimately where we landed was that they still believe it was a targeted attack, but have not defined that any further.
Interesting. Next comment from Bundy Data. And this is not confirmed. This is coming directly from Bundy, but he or she writes, the area within just 2 miles, there are 7 psychiatrists and a psychologist right there. Does one counsel a person with violent fantasies? Which I can tell you the answer to that is I'm sure it is. As a son of a psychiatrist, they do that. Did someone prescribe heavy psychotropic meds? And it goes on. Jonny, to you, when you're working a case, are you checking that angle out as well? Are you looking at therapists and potential patients that might seem really out of character in the neighborhood from which you're searching?
More so on something like this, we'd be looking for any contacts of people who've been stalking, harassing, trespassing, all those sorts of things, to see if we have a prowler or someone who's looking to do a targeted attack in the neighborhood, and this might have been their first one. I did have a case where a psychic lived about 5 blocks from where our victim was. And in our neighborhood, we didn't contact the psychic. We thought, she would be able to solve the case for us, but she was unable to. But yeah, with the psychiatrist thing, we would just look more as if a lead sends us there, then we'll go there.
We just had 2 psychics on, and it was really interesting, and both of them solved cases. So,
Yeah. No, yeah, you talk to everyone. Those are some of the more interesting interviews in my career. So,
for sure. This person admits to speculate, they say, regarding motive, and they write, a local rural person, perhaps same age or somewhat older than the students, who's very angry and resentful of the rich, shiny outsiders. Idaho strikes me as a particularly insular place, even for a rural area, and Moscow is a college town. There is a college community and a residential community, and they are very separate regarding socioeconomic and cultural status. From a factual standpoint, Kevin, have you found that there's sort of, and I hate using this term, but the townies and then the university students, and do they seem to get along well, or do they seem at odds when you've been doing your canvassing and interviews?
It seems like a community that's pretty enmeshed. And so that's not something I noticed. I mean, it is, rural's a funny term because it's relative here. And I'm not originally from Idaho, but coming from Colorado, a bigger city where I'm from, seeing this community, I would probably, as an outsider, say, wow, that's a really small town. But 26,000 people is actually a fairly large city in Idaho. And so, again, it's relative. And whether it's going to the corner club or, the local restaurant, you're seeing a lot of the same faces. And these are people who have come to live together. And it's a community that's built around the college campus. So it's not like the longtime locals aren't familiar with the fact that there's going to be a lot of college students bouncing around. So I'm not sure I would agree with that. But again, I have limited experience in Moscow, but that's just not a sentiment I noticed while I was there.
I'm curious, prior to this quadruple homicide, were you in Moscow for work for the paper or no?
No, I'd never been. That was my first visit. So, to make the comparisons of what was it like before is difficult, but I'm eager to see what it will be like when I return and we see more students as more come back for the second semester.
Are you going to be there for the return of students?
Yeah, in mid-January, I'm scheduled to be up there.
Hopefully we'll get you back on then. This next one comes from Agatha. I think some people forget that the killer could have worn cut-proof gloves or even thick leather ones. Then he's not necessarily injured. Also, if he cut himself, we don't know how deep the cuts are. Maybe it wasn't that serious and he just put some bandages and Band-Aids on himself at home. Jonny, does this seem like the type of crime you can commit without any self-injury?
It'd be tough. And to do that sort of level of preparation prior to have the exact right gloves. And I don't even know that this killer knew what he was calling what he was going to encounter when he came in the house. So we also don't know, Kevin, unless you know how long he was in the house. Do you have any idea or no?
That's the type of detail we don't have any information from police about. I mean, they won't even tell us what the actual timeline is exactly. We know it was the early morning hours. The mayor of Moscow came out early and said that he believed or he understood that it happened between 3 and 4 a.m., but that timeline has shifted and we don't even know a detail like what the point of entry was in the home. These are just not things they're willing to share.
And they're still trying to piece together Ethan and Xana's timeline, right? They still are asking for some help with that. Is that right?
I think it has more to do. They're looking for information about what may have happened between 9 p.m. and 1:45 when they were at the Sigma Chi fraternity house from which he was a member. But again, being on the ground, I can see something like the proximity from the home to the fraternity house is under 600 feet. It really is a short walk across a field. So it's a lot closer than I understood it to be before I ever got out there. But police seem to believe that they were there from that entire duration, 9 to 1:45. it's sort of what happened at the party, and it's not clear where they were before then. But that's a pretty big window for them to try and understand and again pinpoint them that they do believe they were at the home. And it's not clear how they got home, but if they didn't walk, I'm not really sure what else they would have done.
Couple final questions, and we will get your closing remarks, and we will call it a wrap. This one comes from Teresa Nelson. I'm told this is a silly question. There are no silly questions, but someone asked, and I had never thought about it, but would they have tested Murphy, that's the dog that was home at the time of the killings, for having been sedated? Kevin, did anyone ever ask police if they tested that dog, like toxicology wise, to see if it was sedated?
I haven't heard that. I do know that police came out after the fact and said that they did not find DNA evidence on the dog. I believe so. I'm not quite sure, but I believe they found the dog in a separate room. But they're not clear if maybe the roommates did that. The unharmed roommates. It's just there's information like that. We just don't have that level of detail.
And the dog didn't make any noise, which is why that comment came to surface. This next one also, I think, would be for you, Kevin. And this is probably premature. What happens to houses with crime scenes like this? Will this house be torn down? Do you think anyone will ever live there again?
It's a question we've had in the newsroom. What will happen to this home? Unclear. I believe the owner is a landlord who owns properties all over the Western U.S. It's managed by a property management firm. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, unclear. I hate that this might be the type of thing where people want to visit Moscow and go see the home. There's a ton of traffic over there. A lot of it has to do with media and neighbors just trying to make their way beyond it to get home. But yeah, I mean, it really is an interesting question and not one I have an answer for.
Jonny, in your experience, where these heinous crimes have been committed, did they tear down the home afterwards?
Had some of both. Had some where the home was destroyed, and then had some where they sold it and people moved right in. So
wouldn't be me, I'll tell you that. Sure as hell, I'm not moving into a house like that. I know in certain states, you have to. I don't know if it's nationally, but you have to disclose if someone died in the home, even of benign causes. You have to let them know, the buyer. This comment again, Kevin, I think speaks to you. Can you, in this case, Kevin, confirm that Stacy Chapin, the mother of Ethan, told the Idaho Statesman that the two roommates heard something? Do we know if that was reported?
I believe so. A colleague of mine she was a source for a colleague of mine, and I believe she was sort of questioning how maybe there hadn't been noise. I'd have to look back at our clips. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. And let's close out on this one also from user with a gazillion letters. And I think, Jonny, this is going to be right up your alley here. Great show, and the guests you have on always bring great insight. Obviously, tonight is no example. My own thoughts on this are the police firmly have a suspect identified and are waiting to draw out more information from him before making an arrest. I believe the information put out is misleading on purpose, such as the dog that was skinned, which has nothing to do with the case, and even the white Hyundai Elantra. This is done so the killer thinks they're looking down a completely different avenue and become even more brazen in their comments. I fully believe an arrest is imminent over the coming months. So, Jonny, do you believe this case will be solved in the coming months? And do police release information to try to trip up the killer or killers?
Not in this case. Not playing double level chess. It's pretty dangerous in something like this to draw out someone. No, and you look at the pressure that is on, because I've sat inside that pressure cooker of trying to arrest someone, put your community at ease. If they had someone, we would know. So they want to put Moscow at ease. They want to put even the nation at ease, but especially that community who feels unsafe right now. And they have, if someone committed these crimes, that person's walking around and they know about it, it's not going to happen.
And Johnny, with a case like this that's this high profile, how high up the the proverbial totem pole, which is probably not allowed to be used anymore as an expression, but I just did. How high up does this go? Just going up to I mean, is the FBI director getting briefings on this? Is this going all the way? Is someone at the White House interested in how this is proceeding? I mean, how far up does this go?
Well, nobody at those levels want to be surprised by anything. So, yeah, they will have the press information officer from the local office will brief the national office and go up there. So I wouldn't be surprised if it is at a national level, based upon the media coverage that this is getting.
So, Johnny, I'm not Johnny, excuse me, Kevin. Any final thoughts? And what can you tell us what you're working on without revealing too much, and what your next steps are?
Got a few things in the hopper. We have some public records filed, a couple of threads we're pulling at and trying to get little details, and hopefully those become big stories. So just out of competition, I'll probably withhold any other specifics. Some of that stuff doesn't pan out too, and that's just sort of the nature of the game. But as far as closing remarks, the things I would just say is, there's obviously so much national attention. It's interesting to me to hear that perhaps President Biden is watching this from a distance, or that the FBI director has some mind on this. But the thing that that kind of regrounds me on this whole thing is just kind of the shock of this incident. And it's the more you talk about it, and the more desensitized we become to it. 4 people, obviously, 4 families lost their loved ones, and too many friends to count. But I think just understanding how shocking this truly is, that 4 people's lives were robbed, it really is a hard thing to wrap your mind around. And that reminder, though, helps me to stay motivated, and I'm sure it's what's continuing to motivate police.
Very eloquently said. I just had a visual of someone throwing the Idaho Statesman underneath the door of the Oval Office just now. Johnny, your final take on this. How does this all end?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Kevin. Kevin, I did have a couple of go-tos in the media like you over my 25 years. And I can tell just from spending an hour with you that you are devoted to this, you're careful, you're measured with your words, and you do contribute in a case like this as a media person. Some of my people steered me in the right way, and I appreciate what you're doing down there on behalf of the families and even for law enforcement.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. So with this case, what I've seen, Joel, or some of the investigators that come in that are new want to hit the home run. They want to go put cuffs on this guy and get him off the street. And this is a game of singles. It's not a game of home runs. And it's every time you come up to bat, you just want to do something each day, and they might be in for a long grind. They might not. It might be the single that wins the game. But I believe from what I've seen, they're working diligently. They're working hard. I've seen, a couple other FBI guys comment that because you don't hear a lot of things means that they're doing what they should be doing right now. And that is gathering in all this information, processing it. They know, the investigators, like I said, that I took this stuff home. They're taking it home and they're living this stuff right now. So I hope that this community can be patient. I hope that this investigation remains organized and diligent. And I do think if they do those things, they'll be successful.
And Johnny, I will circle back and correct your analogy. It is not a game of singles, but a game of free throws. I bet you were, what was your free throw percentage in college? I bet it was over 85%.
It was decent. I actually didn't shoot many free throws. I was scared to go in the paint, Joel, because those guys are too big and strong. So I just stayed out and shot threes all day.
Listen, 2 of the finest guests we've had, the man with the nicely trimmed beard, Kevin Fixler, an investigative reporter with the Idaho Statesman, which President Joe Biden is now reading every single day. The man who is cleanly shaven is Jonny Grusing, spent 25 years as an FBI special agent. He investigated international terrorism, espionage, bank robberies, kidnappings, serial murders, special jurisdiction crimes, missing persons, public corruption. The list goes on a mile long. Jonny, no book yet? Have you written a book yet?
Starting one. Maybe I'll have Kevin look at it for me.
100%. Don't ever have the broadcast guys, have the print journalists. But listen, appreciate you both being here. I hope you both come back. Kevin, I'll get you back on once you head back to Moscow. Love you, America.